and you don't get to these games by accident. You know, I mean, these are two great teams, two great coaching staffs. Harbaugh has had his fair share of detractors over the years, as has Kirby for some of the mistakes he's made. But these are two pretty high level coaches and coaching staffs, obviously. And then you give them 30 days to prepare for a game. Michigan's not going to be surprised by Brock Bowers.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
he's a
He's
freshman.
not flying under the radar.
Right. And if they
Unfortunately.
didn't have this eye on him before the SEC championship game, then you can rest
They definitely
assured
got
they've
it now.
spent a significant amount of time thinking about what they're going to do to try to slow Brock Bowers down. And that's kind of the interesting chess match with these first round playoff games, because you get so much time to prepare, and it's not like a week one game, because you don't really know what your opponent is going to do in week one. I mean, you can look at, the players they had coming back and whatever, but when you're talking about playoffs, I mean, generally speaking, teams are going to do what got them there. Michigan's not going to come out running 5 wide 80% of the time in this game. I mean, Michigan's going to do what Michigan's been doing all year long.
But I wanted to ask you, sorry to cut you off there. I wanted to ask you, Des, too. We watched Cade McNamara throw for 400 yards against MSU. Obviously, that was their only loss of the year. So, that's a little skid mark on their schedule. But when they have had to go to Cade McNamara to throw, it's not like he's unable to at all. They can get the ball to those guys, and they have talented wide receivers and talented tight ends. So do you think if that running game is not working, they're going to try and do what they did against MSU and start throwing all over the place?
Yeah, I agree. I think, to me, my thought with Cade, and I will raise my hand, and we've been on the podcast since week one, and I was of the thought process and of the train of thought that and against the Westerns and Northern Illinois of the world, I thought Michigan and Harbaugh and Gaddis were wasting reps. I thought, Cade should have been throwing the ball more, kind of like what Uncle Lou was saying against, for Georgia, against Georgia Tech and Charleston Southern, not throwing the football. Like I was of the thought that this was an ideal time when, like, same thing Uncle Lou said, when you're going to win by 100, throw the ball around. I thought,
I totally
trending
agree.
to that Wisconsin game, I thought Cade needed anywhere from 100 to 125 pass attempts just to get him comfortable to the point of, if that run game doesn't produce and is not effective, that you feel comfortable with what he can do. Now, I was wrong in that, in that thought process, because the credit I'll give to Jim Harbaugh, because I was critical of him earlier in the season, the credit I'll give him is they stuck to what they do, and they have just essentially just improved week after week. So it's been one of those things where, like you mentioned, like, no, Cade wasn't throwing it all around against, early on in the season, Western Michigan, Northern Illinois, really even Wisconsin, he didn't throw it around a lot,
Even like where I was frustrated was, like, you get down to the stretch of the season, Indiana is at the, on the back end of the schedule, and they still just like ran the ball and got out of there with a 30-something to 7 win or something like that.
Yep.
I'm like, I want to, at the time, obviously, I was like, why is Michigan not preparing for Ohio State and trying to score 50 points? Because we all thought that Michigan was going to have to score 50 to beat Ohio State, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I agree with you. We've been proven wrong, essentially. They've gotten to this point. But I think that, the question more is, how quickly is Josh Gaddis going to adapt to if they can't move the ball on the ground? And more so, can Michigan throw the ball? Let's be honest. Michigan State's defensive secondary was literally 130th in the country this year. So Cade McNamara threw for 400 yards, but so did every other person on their schedule. Georgia is not just going to let him throw the ball all over, right? So I think it's, will they try? I'm sure that they will give it an attempt if they can't run the ball, but will they succeed is the better question there.
Yeah, you just got to keep, with the defense as talented as Georgia's, you got to keep them honest. Like, Georgia can't know that they know they've got you stopped in the run, and
Right.
they are, Kirby can bring in all of the just different coverages and things like that. If those, guys on the back end, because they're extremely talented. They've got 4 stars, 5 stars just across the board. It's not a defense that you can be one dimensional against and have success. So they are going to have to, if it's not establishing the run, you still have to commit to it, and I think of in the NFL when Brady was with the Patriots, and it wasn't always the run game was effective, that they were getting 4 or 5 yards of carry, but it was just that they continued the run attempts. Like that's almost just as important. So I think as long as Michigan sticks with it and it is creative, I think they can have success, but it's not going to be easy. I think if you look at the Georgia Alabama game as just the blueprint of, hey, just go out there and do what they did. I mean, you're talking about a Heisman Trophy winner, it would Bryce. Like, I mean, everyone doesn't have that, right? There's only
Yeah.
one this year, so you're to try to copy and paste that blueprint. I don't think it's going to work, and for Michigan's sake, I don't think they're going to try to do that. So it'll be interesting to see kind of how they started off. Um, Uncle Lou, I'll ask you with as far as Georgia's defense. I know a guy that was as dominant, through the regular season as Jordan Davis was. Alabama did some tempo and some things that kind of to get him, I think, out of his normal groove, his normal rhythm. Like you mentioned, they have, I think 15 or 19 guys that they go on their D line, and they kind of did some tempo things to keep him on the field. What were your thoughts on just overall his performance? And I'm sure Georgia fans have piled on him, so I don't want to crush him, but just wanted to get your thoughts on, on his performance in
Yeah,
the SEC championship
it was
game.
a bad performance by a lot of people on the defense, but Jordan Davis in particular. And some of it, I think, is on him. Some of it maybe not. I mean, once Alabama starts going tempo and they're not substituting, Georgia can't substitute. And as much as I love Jordan Davis, and I was talking to some NFL guys the other day. In the NFL, he's a first down player, and that's it. I mean, he's not playing in the NFL on second or third downs. The way they throw the ball there, and at UGA, he's a first down guy, and if it's second and 6 or less, they leave him in, really. But there's a lot of times where Jordan Davis goes in, plays one play, and comes out. I mean, if it's second and 10, he's coming out. If it's third and 8, he's coming out. And they weren't able to do that against Alabama when Alabama went with that hurry up, the tempo offense, and clearly it wore him out. And maybe part of it too was, it's great when you win every week by 30 and 40 points and you're not having to sweat in the fourth quarter of a bunch of games. But a lot of these people ain't never played in the second half. I mean, not that they haven't played, but it's very rare that a Georgia starting defense has had to play 4 quarters. Clemson, 1 or 2 other games, and that's it. The rest of Georgia's games were just blowouts, and so you had a lot of freshmen and third, fourth, fifth string guys in the second halves of games, and I think that showed against Alabama. The defense was wore out. You give credit to Alabama, for the tempo and deciding to do that. It obviously worked. And then Georgia's defense just played bad. I mean, you can't have blown coverages on the back end. I mean, if you get beat by Jameson Williams, fine. Okay. You got beat by one of the best receivers in college football. But how in the world is Jameson Williams running down the field on a 25-yard crossing route and there's nobody within 20 yards? How do you lose him?
Right.
Like,
you can lose a lot of guys, but not him.
Right.
Running back out of the backfield, but Mechie early, before he got injured, and
you have to
Williams.
know. Okay, there he is. Let's figure that out first, and then let everything else. Not the post route he caught in the middle in double coverage. Great. There's nothing you can do about that. The guy, it was double coverage. The UGA guys were in position. They just got outran, and Bryce Young made a perfect throw 60 yards down the field, and he walked into the end zone. Okay, I don't like that, but you can live with that. But you see a guy running, there's nobody within 20 yards, and stuff like that hadn't happened all year. So do I think Alabama is whatever it is, 17 points better than Georgia? No, they were 17 points better 2 weeks ago. But is the Alabama offense terrible because they scored 10 points against Auburn in regulation, or did the Alabama offense have a bad day? probably had a bad day.
Hmm.
And unfortunately for Georgia, their bad day came at the worst possible time against the best team we'd played. And Alabama gets a lot of credit for that. I'm not letting Georgia off the hook and saying, well, they just had a bad day. It's no big deal. If Georgia meets Alabama again, they got some serious work they're going to have. They can't perform the way they did the first time. The result will be the same or worse.